The Great Hall of Station Nexus Prime stretched out before Daeho Kim like a vast ocean of hostile faces. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved seating areas, their strange forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have been beautiful if not for the cold stares directed at the lone human standing at the center platform. Daeho adjusted his formal diplomatic robes and looked up at the towering figure of High Counselor Zelth. The creature's 4 arms moved in slow, ceremonial gestures as it spoke in the universal tongue that always sounded harsh when used by non-humans. The Human Petition for Emergency Refugee Aid Protocol 779 has been reviewed by this council, Zelth announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The proposal calls for immediate food and medical supplies to be sent to the war-torn Kepler system, where approximately 4 million sentient beings face extinction. Daeho felt his heart rate increase. This was the 3rd time in 2 years that humanity had brought this issue before the council. 3 different refugee crises, 3 different pleas for basic humanitarian aid. Each time, the response had been the same cold dismissal. From the Vorthon section of the hall, Cleth rose on his massive hind legs. The reptilian warrior's scales gleamed under the artificial lights as he spoke. Once again, the humans bring their emotional thinking to this chamber. They ask us to waste precious resources on beings who cannot contribute to galactic society. This is not logic. This is weakness. A wave of agreement rippled through the alien delegates. The insectoid representatives clicked their mandibles in approval. The energy beings of the Photon Collective pulsed with satisfied light patterns. Even the usually neutral aquatic dominion remained silent, which Daeho knew meant they agreed with Cleth. "Honorable Counselor Cleth," Daeho said, stepping forward, "we are not asking for charity. Humanity is willing to organize and fund the entire relief operation. We only need permission to enter Galactic Council protected space to deliver the aid." Cleth's laugh was like the sound of grinding stone. "And why should we allow human ships to contaminate our protected zones? Your species breeds without control. You form emotional attachments to individual lives instead of thinking about the greater good. You are useful for manual labor and simple problem solving, but matters of life and death should be left to superior minds." The words hit Daeho like physical blows. He had heard similar statements hundreds of times during his 10 years as Earth's ambassador, but they never stopped hurting. Around the chamber, other alien representatives nodded in agreement. To them, humans were tools. Clever tools, perhaps, but tools nonetheless. "If I may address the council," came a new voice. Daeho turned to see Representative Vyth of the Etherian Collective rising from her crystal platform. The translucent beings. Internal lights flickered in what Daeho had learned was a sign of deep thought. "The humans do possess certain crude engineering skills," Vyth said in her musical tone. "Their emotional nature, while primitive, does allow them to solve problems that more advanced species might overlook. However, their solutions are always temporary fixes rather than elegant, permanent solutions." More nods around the chamber. Daeho clenched his fists behind his back. The Etherians were considered the most intelligent species in the galaxy, and their backhanded compliments somehow stung worse than direct insults. High Counselor Zelth raised one of his 4 hands for silence. "The matter before us today is not merely the refugee aid request. We must also vote on Human Expansion Application 42 concerning 3 star systems in the Outer Rim." Daeho's stomach dropped. The Kepler 442, Ross 128, and Wolf 359 systems. Human colony ships had discovered all 3 systems 15 years ago. Human terraforming teams had spent decades making them habitable. Human families were already building homes on 2 of the worlds. The systems in question were discovered by human exploration vessels, Daeho said quickly. Under Article 12 of the Galactic Charter, the discovering species has first rights to colonization. Article 12 applies only to full members of this council, Zelth replied smoothly. Humanity was granted associate membership only. The distinction is important. Daeho felt the floor seeming to shift under his feet. Associate membership. In 10 years of diplomatic service, he had convinced himself that humanity was slowly earning respect among the galactic community. Now he realized they had never been more than junior partners, barely tolerated guests at the adult table. Representative. Nith of the Crystalline Assembly stood next. Her body was like a living gemstone, refracting light into beautiful patterns as she spoke. The proposed human colonies present several concerns. Human genetic material is highly aggressive and tends to contaminate local ecosystems. Their reproduction rates are unstable and unpredictable. Most concerning, their tendency toward individual decision-making creates chaos in established order. The Crystalline Assembly proposes that these systems be placed under Galactic Council administration, added Representative Kex of the Silicon Confederacy. More stable species can develop them properly, without the mess that human emotions inevitably create. The vote was swift and brutal. Species after species raised their appendages, lights or energy fields in favor of the proposal. The Vorthans voted to take the systems away from humanity. The Etherians agreed. The Silicon Confederacy, the Photon Collective, the Insectoid Hives, even the usually friendly Aquatic Dominion, all voted against human colonization rights. When the final tally appeared on the great display screen, Daeho stared at the numbers in shock. 837 votes in favor of removing the systems from human control, 43 votes against. Even some of the smaller species that humanity had helped in the past had voted against them. The motion passes, High Counselor Zelth announced. The 3 disputed systems will be placed under direct Galactic Council administration until suitable species can be found to develop them properly. Daeho opened his mouth to object, but Zelth continued speaking. Furthermore, the refugee aid request is denied. The Council finds that emotional responses to suffering are not sufficient justification for resource expenditure. This session is concluded. The great chamber began to empty as alien delegates filed out, chattering among themselves in dozens of languages. Daeho remained standing on the central platform, feeling smaller and more alone than he ever had in his life. As the last delegates left, Cleth approached the platform. The massive Vorthon warrior looked down at Daeho with something that might have been pity. "You take this too personally, little human," Cleth said. "Your species has value as workers and problem solvers. Be content with that role instead of reaching for things beyond your nature." After Cleth left, Daeho stood alone in the empty chamber. The silence pressed down on him like a physical weight. 10 years of his life spent trying to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. 10 years of careful diplomacy, respectful requests, and patient explanation of human values and capabilities. All of it had been meaningless. To the Galactic Council, humans were not partners or even junior allies. They were useful servants who had forgotten their place. Daeho pulled out his encrypted communicator and began composing a message to Fleet Admiral Sunmi Park. The message was short, but it would change everything. The time for begging had ended. The message from Daeho arrived at Fleet Admiral Sunmi Park's command center at 0347 hours, ship time. She read it twice before calling an emergency meeting of the Human Colonial Council. Within an hour, the most important leaders of humanity were gathered in the secure conference room aboard the flagship Soul's Pride. "They voted to take our colonies away," Sunmi said without introduction. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the table. 3 systems, 15 years of work, thousands of families who have never known any other home. Dr. Hyun-Woo Lee, the chief scientist of the human fleet, shook his head slowly. "The Kepler 442 terraforming project alone cost us 20 billion IE credits and 17 lives. We turned a dead rock into a garden world, and now they want to hand it over to someone else." General Bora Choi slammed her fist on the table. "This is exactly what I said would happen. We've been too soft, too willing to compromise. They see kindness as weakness. "What are our options?" asked engineer Tae-jin Seo. His quiet voice carried the weight of someone who had spent decades building the infrastructure that kept human colonies alive. Legally, I mean. Is there any way to fight this through their courts? Sunmi activated the holographic display in the center of the table. Star maps appeared, showing the location of every human settlement, every colony ship, every outpost scattered. Across the galaxy, there were so many dots of light that they looked like stars themselves. "I had our legal team review the Galactic Charter," she said. "As associate members, we have very few rights. We can file appeals, but those take years to process, and the systems would remain under council control during that time." "What about the defense clause?" Bo-Ra asked. "Article 96 says that member species have the right to protect their citizens and property. Associate members only," Hyun-woo replied bitterly. "We keep coming back to that. Associate members can be overruled by full members at any time." Sunmi looked around the table at the faces of her colleagues. These were the people who had led humanity to the stars, who had built a civilization that spanned dozens of worlds. Now they were being told that none of it mattered because they were not good enough to sit at the adult table. "There is another option," she said quietly. "Article 847, complete withdrawal from the Galactic Council." The room fell silent. Outside the conference room's windows, the lights of human ships stretched to the horizon. Colony vessels, cargo haulers, research ships, and the sleek forms of the human defense fleet. All of it had been built under the protection of Galactic Council law. "If we withdraw," Tae-jin said slowly, "we lose access to their trade networks. No more quantum communication relays. No more protection from the Council's security forces. We also lose their restrictions," Bo-Ra pointed out. "No more limits on our military buildup. No more committees deciding where we can and cannot go." "The economic impact would be severe," Hyun-woo warned. "We import raw materials from 47 different species. Our medical technology relies on Etherian crystal matrices. Our faster-than-light drives use Vorthan power cores." Sunmi nodded. She had spent the last 6 hours reviewing similar reports. Humanity had become deeply integrated into the galactic economy, but that integration came with strings attached, strings that were now being pulled tight around their necks. "I want options," she said. "Full strategic analysis. How long would it take to evacuate every human settlement in Council space? What would we need to become completely self-sufficient?" The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. Messages flew between human colonies across the galaxy. Colonial governors like Min Ho-yoon on New Busan and Yoon Ji-han on the Titan's Echo mining stations received coded orders to begin quiet preparations for a possible evacuation. The work was heartbreaking. On Kepler 442b, Min Ho stood in the middle of Harmony City, the capital that his colonists had built from nothing. The streets were lined with trees that had taken 8 years to adapt to the alien soil. Children played in parks that had been carefully designed to remind families of the Earth that many had never seen. "How do I tell them?" he asked during a secure communication with Sunmi. "How do I tell 50,000 people that they might have to abandon everything they've built?" "You tell them the truth," Sunmi replied. "That we're not wanted here, but that doesn't mean we're not worth something." Yoon Ji-han faced different challenges on the mining stations. Her people were engineers and technicians who had spent decades learning how to extract rare minerals from the asteroid belts. They had developed new techniques, created new technologies, made themselves essential to the galactic economy. "The aliens don't understand what we do here," she reported to the council. "They see mining as simple work, but we've revolutionized resource extraction. When we leave, they'll realize how much they depended on our innovations." Similar reports came in from across human space. On Research Station Alpha Centauri, human scientists had been quietly solving problems that had puzzled alien researchers for centuries. Their approach of combining different technologies and ideas was something that more rigid alien minds struggled with. Dr. Hyun-woo collected all these reports and presented them to the council. "We're not just colonists," he said. "We're the maintenance crew for galactic civilization. We fix things that break. We solve problems that others can't. We build bridges between species that can't even breathe the same air. And they treat us like servants," Bo-Ra added grimly. The final decision came when Daeho sent another message. The Galactic Council had voted to restrict human expansion to their current territories. No new colonies, no new exploration, no growth beyond what they already had. Humanity was being put in a box and told to stay there. "They want us to be pets," Sunmi said after reading Daeho's report. "Useful pets who do the jobs they don't want to do themselves." The vote was held that evening. Every human colony, every ship, every settlement got to participate. The question was simple. Stay and accept second-class status, or leave and face an uncertain future. The result was not even close. 87% voted to withdraw from the Galactic Council. Sunmi activated the quantum relay network one last time to send humanity's formal notice of withdrawal. The message was brief and formal, citing Article 847 of the Galactic Charter. Humanity was leaving. The aliens' response was swift and predictable. The Vorthon High Command placed bets on how quickly the emotional humans would come, crawling back. The Etherian Collective issued a statement expressing mild concern about the disruption to their research projects. Most species simply ignored the news entirely. They would not ignore it for long. Within hours, human ships across the galaxy began powering down the systems they had built and maintained. Quantum communication relays went dark. Translation networks failed. Trade stations that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly found themselves without the human technicians who had kept them running. Tai-Jin Seo coordinated the largest infrastructure shutdown in galactic history. "Take everything," he ordered his teams. "Every piece of human technology, every innovation, every improvement we made to their systems. If they don't want us as partners, they don't get our work either." The great exodus had begun. The first sign of trouble came from the hegemony of Brass, the proud warrior race that had always looked down on human cowardice and emotional weakness. Their massive shipyard orbiting the planet Korath Prime had been built using human-designed, adaptive manufacturing systems. But the Vorthans had never bothered to learn how those systems actually worked. Fleet Commander Vex stood in the control center of the shipyard, watching alarms flash across every display screen. What should have been a routine upgrade to the manufacturing protocols had somehow triggered a cascade failure that was spreading through the entire facility. "Shut down Section 7, Vex ordered his technical staff. The Vorthan engineers worked frantically at their control stations, but nothing they tried seemed to stop the spreading disaster. "Commander, the safety systems are not responding," reported Chief Engineer Czar. His reptilian face showed the confusion that all Vorthons felt when faced with problems that could not be solved through direct force. The humans who installed these systems left behind instruction manuals, but they are written in their strange emotional language. Vex growled deep in his throat. The instruction manuals were written in standard galactic basic, the same language they were speaking now. But human technical writing included concepts like troubleshooting and creative problem-solving that Vorthon minds struggled with. They were used to systems that either worked or did not work, with no middle ground. "Get me Tai-Jin Seo on Bo." "The quantum relay," Vex commanded. "That human engineer who designed our systems." "Sir," Czar said quietly, "the humans withdrew from all communication networks 6 months ago. We have no way to contact them." Through the massive viewing windows, Vex watched as another section of the shipyard exploded in brilliant fire. 3 nearly completed dreadnoughts, each one worth more than the gross planetary product of a dozen worlds, twisted apart in the vacuum. The shipyard that had been the pride of the Vorthan military was destroying itself, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. By the time the cascade failure finally burned itself out, the shipyard was a dead hulk floating in space. 8,000 Vorthan workers were dead, and the military's primary construction facility was gone. The hegemony of brass had suffered its worst peacetime disaster in 3 centuries, all because they had never learned to maintain the systems they depended on. The news reached the Etherian collective just as they were dealing with their own crisis. Dr. Veith floated in her crystal chamber, her normally bright internal lights dim with worry. The plague affecting their crystal matrices was spreading faster than their finest minds could understand. "Have we made any progress on the translation protocols?" she asked her research team. The Etherian approach to problem-solving was based on pure logic and mathematical analysis, but the plague seemed to follow no logical pattern at all. "Our calculations show 17,000 possible solutions," reported her assistant, Dr. Leth. "However, none of them have proven effective in practice. The organic components of the plague continue to adapt faster than our logical models can predict." Veith's lights flickered with frustration. She remembered Dr. Hyun-Woo Lee, the human scientist who had worked with their research teams for 5 years. His approach had been chaotic and unscientific, but he had solved problems that had puzzled Etherian minds for decades. He would ask questions like, what if the plague isn't trying to destroy the crystals but communicate with them? Questions that made no logical sense but somehow led to breakthrough discoveries. "Contact the human territories," Veith ordered. "Offer Dr. Lee whatever payment he requires to consult on this matter." "Honored researcher," Leth replied softly. "The humans are no longer accepting communications from Council species. Their automated systems return all messages with a simple statement. Message undelivered, sender not recognized." The plague continued to spread. Crystal matrices that had served the Etherian collective for thousands of years began to crack and fade. Their great libraries of knowledge stored in living crystal networks started to die. The most logical species in the galaxy was facing extinction, and logic alone could not save them. On Merchant's Gate, the great trading station that served as the economic heart of the galaxy, Sang-Woo Kim sat in his empty office and watched his life's work collapse around him. As a human trade negotiator, he had spent 15 years building relationships between species that could barely stand to be in the same star system together. The aquatic dominion needed pressure suits to survive in normal atmosphere, while the Silicon Confederacy required environments so hot that water instantly became steam. The Photon Collective existed as pure energy and could only communicate through complex light patterns. Getting all these species to agree on simple trade contracts had required someone who could think like all of them at once. Humans had been perfect for that role. They were adaptable enough to understand dozens of different ways of thinking, emotional enough to build personal relationships, and stubborn enough to keep trying when negotiations seemed hopeless. Sang-Woo had mediated trade disputes that could have led to wars between star systems. Now, without human mediators, those same disputes were escalating out of control. The Silicon Confederacy had blockaded 3 aquatic worlds over a disagreement about mineral rights. The insectoid hives had declared trade war on the Photon Collective because of a misunderstanding about contract terms that any human negotiator could have cleared up in an hour. "Sir," his aquatic assistant gurgled through her translation device, "the Vorthon delegation is demanding exclusive shipping rights through the Kepler corridor. The Etherians are threatening to withdraw from all trade agreements if we grant this request." Sang-Woo rubbed his temples, fighting off a headache that had been building for weeks. "What did they say exactly?" "Word for word." The Vorthon representative said, "Our warriors require swift passage to defend our territories. Delay is dishonor." The Etherian delegate responded, "Logical distribution of resources requires equal access for all parties. Favoritism leads to inefficiency." Both statements were perfectly reasonable from their species' points of view, but each side heard them as insults. The Vorthons thought the Etherians were calling them inefficient. The Etherians thought the Vorthons were demanding special treatment without justification. Without someone who understood both cultures to explain the real meanings, the misunderstanding would keep growing until it exploded into violence. Schedule separate meetings with both delegations, Sang-Woo decided. Maybe I can prevent this from becoming a shooting war. But even as he made the decision, he knew it was hopeless. One human could not do the work that had required thousands of human diplomats, translators, and negotiators scattered across the galaxy. The communication networks that had taken decades to build were falling apart in a matter of months. In the Yaos Galactic Council chambers, High Counselor Zelth called an emergency session. The Great Hall that had once been filled with confident alien representatives now echoed with worried voices and desperate arguments. Representatives demanded explanations for the economic chaos, the infrastructure failures, the growing conflicts between member species. The human withdrawal has caused more disruption than anticipated, Counselor Vresh of the Aquatic Dominion admitted reluctantly. Our economists did not account for their role in maintaining interspecies cooperation. Cleth of the Vorthon hegemony rose from his seat, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. The proud warrior looked older than his years, weighed down by the disaster at his people's shipyard. The humans were useful for simple tasks, he said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. But they should not have been allowed to make themselves. Essential to our operations, this is a temporary setback. We will adapt. But even as Cleth spoke the words, he knew they were not true. The Vorthon military was crippled. Their shipyard was gone, and they had no idea how to rebuild it. The instruction manuals left behind by human engineers might as well have been written in an alien language, which in a way they were. Across the galaxy, the same realization was slowly dawning on species after species. They had not just dismissed humanity as junior partners. They had dismissed the people who had been quietly holding their civilization together. The galactic economy died on a Tuesday. It started small, as these things always do. A trade dispute between the Silicon Confederacy and the insectoid hives over rare earth metals. Without human mediators to explain that the hive's clicking language had 17 different meanings for the word urgent, the Silicon delegates interpreted a routine request as a desperate plea for help. They flooded the market with cheap metals, trying to help their desperate trading partners. The sudden oversupply crashed prices across 12 sectors. Mining operations that had operated profitably for centuries suddenly found their ore worth less than the cost of extraction. Within a week, the Aquatic Dominion's bioship industry collapsed. Their living vessels required specific minerals that were now too expensive to obtain. Without bioships, trade between water worlds and atmospheric planets became impossible. Food supplies that had flowed smoothly for decades simply stopped moving. Sunmi Park watched the disaster unfold from her command center on New Sol Station, humanity's new capital deep in the Outer Rim territories. Intelligence reports flowed across her screens, each one painting the picture of a galaxy tearing itself apart. The Photon Collective just declared war on the Etherian Collective, reported her aide, Lieutenant Jiwoo Nam. Something about disputed. Research data, but our translators can't figure out what actually happened. Energy beings versus crystal minds, muttered General Bo-Ra Choi from her position at the tactical display. Two species that think they're the smartest things in the galaxy, and neither one can understand why the other is angry. Dr. Hyun-Woo Lee looked up from his research station. I've been analyzing the communication breakdowns. Without human translators and cultural interpreters, the alien species are basically playing a massive game of telephone. Every message gets distorted a little more until friendly greetings sound like threats of war. Sunmi nodded grimly. She had hoped that humanity's withdrawal would teach the aliens to respect them, not destroy galactic civilization entirely. but the cascade of failures was accelerating beyond anyone's control. "There's something else," Hyunwoo continued. "I've been tracking energy signatures from the disputed territories near the Galactic Rim. Something big is moving out there, and it's not any technology I recognize." Before Sunmi could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. Communication Officer Park Soo-jin's voice cut through the noise. "Admiral, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from the Vorthon military. They're under attack by unknown forces in the Rigel sector." The main display screen flickered to life, showing a star map with red warning indicators spreading like infection across an entire arm of the galaxy. Whatever was attacking the Vorthons was moving fast and hitting hard. "Get me a connection to the Vorthon High Command," Sunmi ordered. "Ma'am, they've cut off all communications with human territories," Soo-jin replied. "Standard protocol since the withdrawal. Override their protocols. Use emergency frequencies." The screen crackled with static before resolving into the image of a Vorthon command center in chaos. Cleth appeared on screen, his scales scarred and his armor damaged. Behind him, other Vorthon officers shouted orders while explosions lit up the background. "Human Admiral Park," Cleth said, his pride clearly warring with desperation. "I did not expect to see your face again." "What's happening out there, Cleth?" "Unknown enemy forces, ships that appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. They fight like—" Cleth paused, his expression troubled. "They fight like humans, unpredictable, adaptive, using our own tactics against us before we can react." Sunmi felt ice forming in her stomach. "Send me all the tactical data you have." "Why would you help us? We voted to take your colonies. We called your species inferior." "Because people are dying," Sunmi replied simply. "Send me the data." The files that arrived painted a terrifying picture. The attacking fleet used ships that looked almost familiar but wrong somehow. Their tactics were brilliant and chaotic, switching strategies mid-battle in ways that confused the rigid Vorthon military doctrine. Most disturbing of all, their communication intercepts showed human voices speaking in accents that no current human colony used. Dr. Hyun-woo studied the data with growing alarm. "These energy signatures, they're human technology but advanced far beyond anything we've developed. And these genetic scans from the captured enemy personnel." He looked up at Sunmi with wide eyes. "They're human, but modified, changed." General Bo-ra leaned over his shoulder to study the reports. "How is that possible? All human settlements are accounted for." "Not all," Hyun-woo said quietly. "The colony ship Incheon's dream disappeared during the early expansion period, about 200 years ago. We always assumed it was destroyed, but what if it wasn't? What if it ended up somewhere beyond our exploration range, and the survivors had to adapt to survive?" The implications hit everyone in the room at once. Somewhere out there was a human population that had been cut off from their home species. For 2 centuries, they had evolved, adapted, become something new, and now they were attacking the galaxy that had abandoned them. "We need more information," Sunmi decided. "Hyun-woo, I want you to analyze every piece of data we can get about these attackers. Bo-ra, prepare our defense fleets but keep them in human space for now." Over the following days, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. The attacking force called themselves the Void Cult, and they weren't just raiding random targets. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure of galactic civilization, targeting the exact weak points that humanity had once helped maintain: communication relays, power distribution networks, trade stations, diplomatic centers, everything that connected the galaxy was being methodically destroyed. The aliens' rigid military thinking couldn't adapt fast enough to counter enemies who changed tactics faster than they could analyze them. Counselor Vresh of the Aquatic Dominion managed to get a message through to human space, bypassing the communication blackout through emergency medical channels. Admiral Park, the fish-like alien said through the translator. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request human assistance in dealing with this crisis. Sunmi looked at the message for a long time before responding. The Galactic Council made it very clear that humanity was not welcome as a partner. What's changed? We were wrong, Vresh admitted, the words clearly painful. We treated your species as servants instead of equals. We dismissed your contributions and took your abilities for granted. We are prepared to offer full membership, status, and equal representation if you will help us. It was everything humanity had wanted to hear for decades: recognition, respect, true partnership in galactic affairs. But it had come at the cost of millions of lives and the near collapse of interstellar civilization. I need to discuss this with my government, Sunmi replied diplomatically. But privately, she was already making plans. The Void Cult wasn't just attacking the aliens. They were attacking the idea of civilization itself. And despite everything the galaxy had done to humanity, Sunmi couldn't stand by and watch billions of innocent beings die. The question was whether humanity could stop an enemy that shared their greatest strength, the ability to adapt and overcome any obstacle. The formal apology arrived at exactly 1200 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Sunmi Park read it 3 times before calling the emergency session that would decide humanity's fate and the galaxy's future. The document was signed by every surviving member of the Galactic Council. Even Cleth of the Vorthan hegemony had added his mark, though his proud warrior culture had never apologized to anyone in their recorded history. The message was simple, but devastating in its honesty. To the human species, we were wrong. We treated you as tools instead of partners, as servants instead of equals. We dismissed your contributions and mocked your values. Now our civilization burns because we failed to understand that diversity of thought and approach is not weakness, but strength. We formally request your aid, not as subjects returning to masters, but as equals working together to save what remains of our shared galaxy. Around the conference table on New Sol Station, the leaders of humanity debated their response. The room was filled with the same people who had voted to withdraw from galactic society 18 months ago. But the weight of recent events had changed them all. "They're desperate," said General Bora Choi bluntly. 6 months ago, they wouldn't even let us sit at their table as equals. Now they want us to save them from their own mistakes. Dr. Hyunwoo Lee looked up from his analysis tablets. "I've completed my study of the Void Cult. They're definitely descended from the crew of the Incheon's Dream, but 2 centuries of isolation and genetic modification have changed them. They've combined human adaptability with complete ruthlessness. They see the current galactic civilization as weak and corrupt." "Are they wrong?" asked Engineer Tae-jin Seo quietly. "The aliens dismissed us as inferior for decades. Maybe the galaxy does need to be torn down and rebuilt." Dae-ho Kim, recently returned from his bitter retirement, spoke for the first time. "I spent 10 years trying to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. I watched them vote to take our homes away, dismiss our people as useful animals, and treat our values as primitive emotions. Part of me wants to let them burn for what they did to us." The room fell silent. Everyone remembered. The humiliation, the casual dismissal of human worth, the vote to steal their colonies. "But," Dae-ho continued, "if we let anger and revenge guide us, we become exactly what the Void Cult represents. They're what humanity could become if we let bitterness consume us." Sunmi activated the holographic display, showing the latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Red zones marked areas under Void Cult control, and they were spreading fast. Entire star systems had gone dark. Billions of alien beings were dead or missing. "The question isn't whether the aliens deserve our help," she said. "The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we don't try to save the innocent people caught in the middle." Ji-hoon Park, Sunmi's younger brother and former colonial governor, leaned forward. I lost everything when we evacuated New Busan. My home, my life's work, the community I'd spent 15 years building. But I also remember the insectoid families who lived near our settlements. They never voted against us in the council. Their children played with our children. Do they deserve to die because their leaders were bigots? The debate continued for hours, but gradually the mood in the room shifted. These were the people who had built humanity's civilization among the stars. They were explorers, builders, problem solvers. Even after all the insults and injuries, they couldn't simply watch the galaxy burn. The final vote was closer than the withdrawal had been, but the result was clear. Humanity would intervene. The human fleet that emerged from dark space 3 days later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Months of independence had allowed human engineers to develop new technologies without the restrictions of Galactic Council regulations. Their ships were faster, more adaptable, and designed with the hard-won knowledge that in space, flexibility meant survival. Admiral Sun-Mi Park stood on the bridge of her flagship New Seoul as it dropped out of hyperspace near the embattled Etherian homeworld. The planet's surface was covered in the distinctive energy storms that marked void cult attacks. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for millennia were cracking apart under bombardment. Enemy fleet detected, reported Tactical Officer Yoon Seo-jun. 47 ships using modified human technology. They're not running standard formation patterns. Of course they're not, muttered General Bo-Ra Choi from her position at the Combat Coordination Station. They're fighting like humans. That means they'll adapt their tactics the moment we engage them. The battle began with the Void Cult ships, attempting to use their standard hit-and-run tactics, but the human fleet was ready for them. Bo-Ra had studied every report from their previous attacks and developed countermeasures for their most effective strategies. They're adapting faster than expected, reported Seo-jun as the enemy formation shifted mid-battle. New attack pattern, unlike anything in their previous engagements. Then we adapt faster, Bo-Ra replied calmly. She began issuing new orders, changing the human fleet's approach even as the battle raged around them. It was like watching two master chess players, each trying to stay one move ahead of the other. The real breakthrough came when Dr. Hyun-woo managed to break through the Void Cult's communication encryption. Their voices came through the speakers, speaking Korean with an accent that sounded like it came from another century. "Target the crystal formations," ordered a voice identified as Admiral Doksu Han, the Void Cult's leader. "Destroy their ability to think collectively. Make them face death as individuals." Sun-Mi felt her blood run cold. She recognized that name from the Inchin's Dreams crew manifest. Doksu Han had been the ship's first officer, a decorated veteran, known for his tactical brilliance and deep sense of honor. "Open a channel to the Void Cult flagship," Sun-Mi ordered. "Admiral Han," she said when the connection was established. "This is Admiral Sun-Mi Park of the Human Colonial Fleet. I know who you are." The face that appeared on screen was still recognizably human, but changed by centuries of genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement. Doksu Han's eyes held intelligence and madness in equal measure. "Admiral Park," he replied in archaic Korean. "I wondered when our cousins would come to defend their alien masters." "They're not our masters," Sun-Mi said firmly, "and you're not our enemy. We're all human beings." Doksu laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Human? Look around you, cousin. Look at what humanity has become under alien rule. Servants begging for scraps of respect. We are what humanity should be. Strong, independent, uncompromising. You're what humanity becomes when it forgets compassion," Sun-Mi replied. "When it lets anger and isolation turn it into something monstrous." The conversation continued, even as the battle raged around them. Slowly, carefully, Sun-Mi began to remind the Void Cult leader of what he had once been. She spoke of Earth, of the values that had driven humanity to the stars, of the dream of building something better among the distant suns. "It's too late," Doksu said finally, but his voice carried less certainty than before. "We've come too far down this path to turn back now." "It's never too late," Sunmi insisted. "That's what makes us human. The ability to choose a better path, even when it seems impossible." The battle ended not with destruction, but with choice. One by one, Void Cult ships began standing down, their crews choosing to remember their humanity rather than their anger. Some fought to the end, too far gone to return, but many were saved. In the aftermath, as human medical teams worked alongside alien doctors to treat the wounded from both sides, Counselor Vresh of the Aquatic Dominion approached Sunmi. "How do we thank you?" the alien asked. "How do we repay this debt?" "By remembering," Sunmi replied simply. "By treating all species as partners, not subjects. By building a galaxy where no one has to choose between dignity and survival." The new Galactic Compact was signed 6 months later. Humanity took their place as full members of the Council, with equal voice and equal respect. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned that strength came not from uniformity, but from diversity, not from rigid thinking, but from the willingness to adapt and change. In the end, humanity had not just saved the galaxy. They had saved the idea that different minds, working together, could build something greater than any single species could achieve alone.